let's go ahead and get started. Good morning, everybody. I want to thank you all for being here at the combined Sterling Fortinet webinar around E-rate, and as you're seeing on your screen, so much more, ... What does that mean? That means we're going to be covering kind of a vast gamut of topics today concerning K12 funding programs that are available to you. We want this to be very educational, very instructive, and very interactive as well. So as you have questions, please throw those in the chat box, and we will make sure to get those answered for you. Starting off, though, I'll go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Corey Cruz. I'm the corporate sales trainer here at Sterling. I will kind of be your host today, monitoring that chat box and also running kind of the Q&A at the end there. As you're seeing on your screen, our agenda, we're going to be covering some introductions. We're going to start off actually with a testimonial from kind of one of your peers out there who's actually gone through this process of kind of done the nitty-gritty, has navigated this successfully. So we're going to ask him to share kind of some of his experiences, best practices, all that sort of thing. After that, we're going to turn it over to the subject matter experts at Fortinet, Jeff Jennings. He's going to be talking about transformation in the IT space, particularly around networking, cybersecurity, all that sort of stuff, and how that fits in with the K12 funding programs that are available. From there, we're going to follow up with some next steps, things you should be thinking about as you're going forward in your own E-rate and funding journey, and then we'll end with some time for Q&A. So again, I want to thank you all for being here. We really do appreciate your time and attention. And just know that, we're grateful for that, and we're grateful for all of our presenters as well. As I mentioned, we're going to start off with a bit of a testimonial. So we've asked Bill Pulte, Chief Information Officer at Educational Service Unit number 3, to go ahead and kind of walk us through kind of some of his experiences in this space, moving through some of this funding, some of the hoops and hurdles that exist out there. Just to give you a brief introduction on Bill, Bill has worked in technology for almost 30 years, particularly education technology since 1999. He's currently, as I mentioned, the CIO for Educational Service Unit 3, which serves a 4-county area in eastern Nebraska. In his role, he manages a team that provides network, system, cybersecurity, and development services to over 18 public schools, serving about 85,000 students. A lot of kids there. So prior to his role at ESU 3, Bill served actually as a solutions architect. So he's kind of been on the vendor side of things as well, and he assisted schools in Nebraska, Iowa, and South Dakota with network and wireless design. From there, he actually started his administrative career in 2007 with Papillion La Vista Community Schools and served over a decade as the Director of Information Technology. So with that, Bill, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you. We're going to ask you about some of your experiences. From your perspective, why is E-rate and ESSER and all that other funding that's available, why is that important? If you had to go back, what would you do differently? What best practices do you have, and anything else you would like to share from your experiences? Bill?
Yeah, so thanks for that. So yeah, just a brief history here. I've been working with the E-rate program since 2003, and as most on this call probably realize, that was when all we were doing is Category 1 stuff. I mean, the focus was on internet lines. I mean, the first stuff we did was for some T1 lines, things like that, and then phones. And when I moved to Papillion, our focus was on the phone support and filing for phones. And then we saw a major shift, as all of you know, in 2014, when the decision was made, hey, we need to do something to increase bandwidth. And I'm not sure how many were around in 2014, but there was a pretty interesting study that was done about how much bandwidth was available per student in a classroom. And then the idea was, hey, we need to get up to this threshold. And that was kind of a mind-blowing shift in the E-rate thinking for many of us. And it was mind-blowing for me as well, because it gave me the opportunity now to start buying equipment that we were struggling to afford and to fund, especially on the timelines that it needed to be done. So we were on a 5-year replacement cycle, or 5-year or 6-year replacement cycle for access points, and at the time we had the idea that access points, we were going for coverage. So that was our goal, was to create as much coverage in a building as possible. And so what we were doing is placing access points out in the hallway so that we would get as much coverage as possible, But what it meant was that our throughput on that coverage, we might have been, if we had multiple classrooms with connected to that single one, we might have, our throughput wasn't any better. And the 2014 change with E-rate really allowed us to evaluate that and think about, okay, where are we placing things? And maybe we can buy more. If we're getting reimbursed for 40%, maybe we can buy X amount more access points, and maybe we don't have to wait 6 years to replace them. Maybe we can do a 4-year replacement cycle, and get that replacement cycle at the same timelines as our devices, so that if we're buying devices with upgraded with updated wireless capabilities, now we also have the ability to have the access points do the same thing. And so that was kind of a mind-blowing shift around the country, I think. But when they asked me to speak on this, the thing that made me interested is I think we're at the precipice of another mind-blowing shift when it comes to E-rate. The focus has always been to get extra or to have as high a bandwidth as possible in classrooms. And I think you're starting to see, and I think COVID led us to this a little bit, is the classroom doesn't just have to be in the school building, first of all, and second of all, what are we doing to provide security? I think you see a lot, and this came up quite a bit last winter, and I'm going to be interested to see what happens over the next 12 months about really evaluating what's happening with those things and really getting people to make their voices heard so that they understand. I'm in the state of Nebraska, and we have conversations all the time about, especially as you get further out west, you might have to spend a Thursday night on a bus, an hour going to a basketball game and an hour coming back. And why is that bus not a classroom? The student has a device. Why can't that bus be considered a classroom? Why can't we do things around there? But then I also think school districts are going to have some more responsibility for guaranteeing that students are filtered on the device at all hours and regardless of where they are. And I think they're also going to have some responsibility around security, and making sure that what is being done on those devices and what's possibly being brought back into the network is acceptable. And so I think all of those things, I think we're just at an interesting time now, because over the next 12 months, I think we're going to see more and more of those conversations being had. And I encourage school districts, or I really push for school districts to make their voices heard. FCC puts out a chance every year to comment. And one of the things I do like about it is you can go in and see who's commented. And one of the things we love about Fortinet is if you go back, they comment constantly on what the FCC is putting out there. And I think that's important from a vendor standpoint, because they're listening to school districts. And I think it's important for school districts to make the same push and make those same comments when the FCC asks for those. And then I also think it doesn't hurt to engage with your national leaders. And then in the state of Nebraska, we had an interesting event last year where a state senator, tried to pass Bill LB 1213, and it really would have been detrimental to students. But the problem was, working in technology, we don't always engage with that group of people. And so I think it's becoming more and more important. And I think E-rate is a perfect lighthouse for this, to say, hey, we need to be more active in the political landscape and what's going on and make our voices heard. Because I think most of the people on this call understand this better than what the state senators do or the national legislators do. So we need to make sure that we're making those comments and we're actively participating in that process.
Awesome. Thank you, Bill. We appreciate that perspective and extra context there. Definitely some interesting shifts going around. And like you said, I think it's very, very important for all of us to participate in that going forward. So we appreciate you lending your expertise there. We are now going to shift focus a little bit. That's a little bit of perspective from, it's a little real world perspective from one of your peers. Let's now talk to one of our subject matter experts, Jeff Jennings, the Senior SLED Practice Director at Fortinet, who has a plethora of experience around around this topic. Just to give you a little bit of introduction here, over 26 years of experience, in fact, working with SLED sectors, that includes K-12, higher education, state and local government. At this role, he's kind of leveraged that extensive experience in the public sector, helping organizations like yourself understand proactive steps that they can take to keep their network data, employees, students, citizens, all of that protected from cyber threats. So Jeff clearly understands the unique challenges and requirements the public sector faces and is dedicated to helping organizations navigate the cybersecurity landscape. So he's been involved with a lot of different programs from FCC E-Rate, BTOP, CARES 1 through 3, EBB, ECF, hopefully I'm saying all these correctly, ARP, and JAG, etc. So that experience, he's worked with over 750 schools throughout that time. He's also engaged with more than 200 manufacturers and resellers participating in these programs with a strong record of consulting services, to local and state school districts and education agencies, both from very small districts to very large agencies and districts. Jeff has really been able to help hundreds of organizations with their strategic planning, their RFP creation, and responses, and all of that has allowed them to, get to digital transformation in SLED. So we're really pleased to have Jeff Jennings on the line today. He's our subject matter expert, and I think this is going to be very instructive and educational, whether you're starting off on your E-rate and funding journey, you know nothing about it, or if you're kind of a veteran, I think you're going to gain some wisdom from Jeff here. So with that, Jeff, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you. I'll make sure to unmute you here. Can you hear us, Jeff?
The insights from Bill. He's been there, done that, worn the t-shirt, had to put out the fire. So I really appreciate what he had to share. And let's go on to the next slide. So transformation is a metamorphosis, and you are going through a transformation, whether you realize it or not. The pandemic caused that, and what you're going through a specific type of transformation. And if it didn't come through in the slides, but the color for transformation is magenta. So if you see magenta, think transform. But really, it's a metamorphosis, and that's what you're having to do. As you were going into the pandemic, we were looking 3, 5, 10 years out to do one-to-one. Pandemic hit, 98.5% of all public education in the world was closed and remote at one point. So that caused a hyper transformation to one-to-one learning that broadened the network from beyond the walls and the buses to everybody's home. Any place there was internet access. You all heard stories of people trying to get near Starbucks or getting to the public library, wherever they could get access. And during that time, there was a massive run on hotspots. And then the ECF program, we'll talk about that more in a minute. But you went through this technology transformation where, frankly, the fact that you're still here, that you have gone through almost 3 years of this now, and you're standing here, you're in the arena. And if you've never read Teddy Roosevelt's speech from 1910 in Paris, France, The Citizens of the Republic, there's a great quote called "The Man in the Arena," and that is you. You stayed. It doesn't matter what people in the stands are doing. You're the ones that kept the business and the practice of education alive. So thank you for doing that. And now you've had to pivot and embrace the changes that were caused. But the other thing that has happened, so you had that DX, the digital transformation. Now you've had to transform security as well because it broadened the attack surface. So it has stretched far beyond what you ever had to deal with before. Long gone are the days where you just had a firewall at the front and then kept the barbarians at the gate. Now you have to assume everybody is a potential risk, and we're now heading towards zero trust network architecture. We'll talk about that more in a minute, because there are a bunch of looming factors that are forcing this SX, the security transformation. Whether you see it now or what's coming down the road, that's what we're going to talk about today. Next one, please. So think big picture and look beyond the E-rate, and I'm going to tell you why. E-rate has been a great program. I was there at the original town hall meeting in DC back in 1996, kicked it off in 97. I'm that old, turned 60 this month. And so I used to be an adaptive PE teacher, special ed teacher, administrator, coach. And so I've learned how to navigate through the programs. I had to understand IDEA, ESEA. I had to understand Title I through 8. So to be able to get my funding from my different programs, had a super bad handwriting, so I had the first computer and daisy wheel printer on campus. And then I became one of the go-to tech guys, which is sad. But what I'm really needing you to do is look at the big picture and look beyond E-rate. Now, the pandemic has been horrible. The funding that has come of that is once in a lifetime funding that will take you through 2024. And absolutely, technology needs to be a part of it because the business and practice of education dies without the network. It's no longer an option. I had a superintendent friend here in Bakersfield who 37 sites, they got taken down in ransomware right before the pandemic. They weren't a Fortinet customer, but honestly, it wasn't the manufacturer's fault. It's because the IT director didn't keep up on the security patches. All 37 sites were taken down. Everything with an IP address was rock solid locked. Took $14 million to recover. And then the pandemic hit while we're in the middle of that. And as my superintendent friend told me, Jeff, it's like it's 1975. Nobody had a pandemic in 1975, and nobody had digital learning in 1975. He retired 6 months later. So look at the big picture to transform. You've got to take advantage of all available funding. And one of the things that we recommend, and we've now had discussions with districts since the pandemic started more than 3,120 times, specifically on these issues, because IT and EdTech is used to their normal budget plus E-rate and maybe a tax levy, or in some states an E-Plost or a bond. They're not used to going after funds that come down through Title I Part A, which is what the ESSER funds came through. You absolutely should, because in all three acts, all three buckets of money, CARES, CRRSA, and ARP, IT is written throughout it, security is written throughout it. So we really need to take a more big picture look at this and make sure that we're taking advantage of any and all the funding, which we'll talk about more in a minute. But so what we would recommend with Sterling and with your shareholders is hold a kickoff meeting, not just for E-rate, but to look at the big picture, look at all the funding. We're going to talk about that because is IT going to get all of it? No, there's 15 areas of latitude for ESSER money that we're going to talk about that it can be used. But the U.S. Department of Ed, the Department of the Treasury, the White House, the new FCC report all point to some of the current and coming funding to use to build out and secure your networks because that money is available now. And frankly, if it's not going to be used in time, it's going to be taken back. And there's a lot of important initiatives that need to be funded, but no department in a school can operate without the network and a secured network. You simply cannot do it. Everything that is encased in an IP packet. So for the meetings, if you have a consultant, E-rate consultant, we'll definitely jump in with you. Sterling will jump in with you. Your district personnel, anybody that needs to have a discussion about how you're going to do this transformation and build this network, because now's your chance. And a bunch of this money does not require funding matches. And we're going to show you how to effectively use E-rate and ESSER together to not cost you a dime. So next slide, please. So updates on what's going on with E-rate and the FCC. By the way, E-rate 101, go to usac.org, but also you can schedule a follow-up meeting with Sterling and with Fortinet, and we can go over this one-to-one. But the FCC just a week ago released their Universal Services Report, and they point to the use of using other funds to meet security and network needs. Why? Because the new proposed eligible services list failed on the cybersecurity side, even though there was 98% that felt that they should take the basic firewall, which is all that's eligible now, to at least next-gen advanced service firewall. The FCC failed to do it. There's a couple reasons why. One is it's a 4-4 commission when it should be a 5, and it's 2-2. The third Democrat is still being reviewed, and frankly, it's going to be a long time before that fifth commissioner is going to be able to tilt the direction one way or the other. That was what they were counting on to get cybersecurity added. So that was a big issue, and frankly, they failed you. And frankly, I feel the FCC has failed you annually since 1997. They allowed the initial firewall, but not having anything besides basic port protection is like trying to stick a sponge in the Mississippi and expect it to stop it. It's not going to work. So they have failed to do that. And now even the FCC commissioner, Chairman Rosenworcel, is pointing to the other funds, and that E-rate and that FCC report is pointing to use the other available funds. So they're also waiting on the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency. This is the new CISA office put in last year, and they're supposed to be putting a report out. They were supposed to put it out this spring. They're clearly late, and that has been a problem. And that is what also stopped the momentum of trying to get cybersecurity in on the ESL, the eligible services list. So look and realize that there is going to be guidance and a toolkit coming from the CISA office. They are the cyber czar for the US. They're going to carry a lot of weight. They have a big budget. There are going to be recommendations to K-12 and education initially. Those are going to be coming mandates down the road. What we're pushing for in our advocacy inside the Beltway and everywhere else is that to make sure the feds and the states provide funding for these security transformation mandates. So all of that will be coming out. They're late, and I'll talk about more what they've got coming in a minute. But the impact, being nearly 6 months late, has had a ripple effect. But we'll talk about that more in a minute. Next slide, please. So with E-rate, I already mentioned E-rate 101. We put the link in there for you, and we want you to have these slides there, walk through it. But really, at this point, if you've been through it, you've had the rabies shots, you've had to go through the process. But one of the things that, and I used to be an E-rate consultant on the school side for several years, and I started with very small school districts, 300 students, to very large students, to American territories, American Samoa and Guam, run into all kinds of interesting issues. But the biggest thing you need to do is a plan with a purpose. Just like I talked about in the bigger scope, the bigger picture, you need to plan with purpose and intention. You need to do that now. And so, again, keep thinking big picture whenever we're talking here. I would say, again, treat both what we're going to talk about together as one big picture. Bring all of those teammates that I mentioned in the previous slide together. Now, once you start doing your 470 and your RFP, putting it together, do not allow outside influence. You can meet with whoever you want beforehand and have these team meetings like what we talked about. I think it's essential to be able to get your transformation and get that network where you need to go. But once that 470 process of filing it and doing the RFP starts, do not allow service providers or manufacturers to be a part of it, because that creates undue influence and that will get your application denied. And like we tell everybody, Sterling and Fortinet are way too pretty for prison. We'll never break any rules. So get one of the things, a plan with a purpose, a needs assessment. What do you need to do? What do you need to know? What do you need to add? What's eligible under the services list? What do you need to have that's not eligible? Having that conversation and listing that out is crucial. Resources to handle the process. Do you have staff buy-in and staff support to get this all done? Because E-rate is a heavy lift annually, every stinking year. And they make just enough changes to create a little bit of chaos every year. One of the things, if you don't have one, you may want to consider is a consultant. More than 70% of the schools and libraries in the U.S. use a consultant for E-rate, just because of all the process and, like I call the rabies shots, the program integrity assurance, the reviews, the questions, the follow-ups. And USAC is the Universal Service Administration Corporation that runs the program for the FCC. They try their best, but they are very flawed, and they make a lot of mistakes. We were involved with 11 districts and libraries that had to file appeals because the reviewers got it wrong. And that's happened every year since I've been in the program. So if you're going through and you're filing and you get a no and you think it's not right, appeal it, because the majority of the time, if you can prove it, they'll get it reversed. They are good about that. And if you're not getting any momentum, and if you're using Sterling and Fortinet, we will go to bat for you as well. I can't tell you how many times I've flown back to the USAC offices in DC, very close to the White House, by the way, and gotten in there and had a little direct talk, where they were for 3 different ones. They were over $1 million each, and it was because the reviewers screwed up. One reviewer just never moved it forward and put it in what they call a black hole. And for the first time ever, I got a complete apology letter for the district from USAC, and 10 days later, they got funded. So if you're running into issues like that, get a hold of Sterling. We're going to give you the backup that you need to do. Now, if you're buying, say, Cisco, and you're using another service provider, no. But with Sterling and Fortinet, absolutely. So processes and compliance, that's an issue. A calendar, because here's the thing. Once you submit the 470, which is the E-rate of Craigslist that says this is what I want, this is when and where and how much, and you submit that, that has to go at least 28 days. And on the 29th day, you can then use a scoring matrix where pricing is the heaviest weighted. Let's say it's 31%. And then other factors like preferred solution or experience with the district, whatever you want to make, you then go through that process. Once you get it through, then you submit the Form 471, which is the winner chicken dinner, who tells who you selected, how much, exactly what the things are. That gets submitted, and then you go through PIA, Program Integrity Assurance. Think of it as an IRS audit for E-rate, and you're going to get at least 3 questions. You have 15 days to respond to that. And then what we recommend as best practice, and I've done it every year, is automatically ask for a 7-day extension, because you can never be late. You can always be early. So process like that is where you're going to need experience. And your ESCs can be very helpful. Consultants can be very helpful. We'll help you where you can. We can be involved before the 470 in the RFP, Sterling and Fortinet, and after you award the 471. But during that phase, that intermediate phase, where you're putting together the 470 and have it out, absolutely cannot. So next slide, please. So here's some practical steps for C2 projects. What's going to happen? You've got it funded. Now what? We've got these on the screen. You need to identify whether the products can be ordered and delivered. And in the supply chain issues, you need to check that out. And you can see the other things on the screen. These are going to be added. I don't want to lose time, but when you're ready for it, this is a quick review for C2 projects. Next slide, please. So one of the things, this is where we talk about ESSER, the Elementary Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund, is where one of the best practices we've seen since these ESSER funds came out is we call it making it bearable. And what that simply means is, let's say you have, for easy math, because I'm not that bright, $1 million project, and you're an 80% school. So that means of the eligible portion, if it's $1 million, USAC FCC E-rate program will pay $800,000. The school district would pay $200,000 of their own budget using the service provider invoice. There's another form called the Build into the Application Reimbursement, Form 472, where if the district pays for everything up front, some good things can happen. One, you can start the project as soon as April 1st. You don't have to wait for your funding commitment decision letter. And then it goes through, and you send in the invoice, it comes through, and then you get reimbursed. Using ESSER, and there are a lot of ESSER funds available. This is a great use for ESSER. Let's say that $1 million project, you use ESSER funding, and you pay the whole $1 million up front using the bear form. That then goes through USAC, and if you've ever watched Ozark, how they laundered money, this is a legal way basically to take that money. You never spend any of your local budget, You take the ESSER money, it goes through at $1 million, it comes back out. That money is reimbursed back to the school district. It does not go back to the state or the feds. It goes back to the local district. That is now local budget. There's no time frame on it. It is strictly local funds. So out of that 1 million, 800,000 came back to your budget. The 200,000 that would have come out of your budget for your portion was paid for by ESSER, so you have a $0 impact on your budget. Using BEAR was less than 8% before the pandemic started. We've seen an exponential increase in using the BEAR invoice for exactly that reason, because let Uncle Sam pay for 100% of it and bring you back some local budget rather than having to do it the more traditional way. If you've got the funding for it, and especially public schools, many of you do. Private, not so much. Public schools, absolutely. It's a great use of both funds, and it's legal and accepted, and it's become a common practice. And so there is no exceptions. Again, you've got 15 areas of latitude we're going to talk about in a minute, but this is a best practice that really benefits your district. Next slide, please. So let's move on to the big picture playbook. Let's continue the transformation, because with E-Rate, they're going to cover, these are some resource links for you. Go ahead. E-Rate will cover switching, access points, routers, basic port protection, firewall, advanced protection is not eligible. So they'll take that price down, they'll take that part down, and so it'll reduce the overall eligibility. So there's in cabling and rack and things like that. But honestly, the ESL has not grown nearly at the same pace as technology has, and that's a problem the FCC needs to address. So real quick, what's going to be driving the use of ESSER and why you're going to need to do it? So security breaches have impacted everybody. K12 is now one of the top 5. EDU, higher ed, is one of the top 10. State and local governments in the top 7. Initiatives in play, the state broadband offices, White House Zero Trust, all these things here are training initiatives. The White House Training Initiative we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about all these to some degree because they're all going to impact you. And then the federal funding that's available, really for K12 at this point, ESSER is the primary, although there is going to be other funding coming, and we need to talk about the state and federal broadband funding. And there's 17 other bills that are addressing funding for network and anchor institutions and security. But big picture, what we think you need to do, big picture planning, can make sure that you're effectively getting a portion of the ESSER and ARP funding. Make sure that you do the assessment. And when I call it an E-rate campaign, that's what it is, because it's not just a form you go in, it's a complete process. Sterling and Fortinet will be with you through that entire process, except for the 470 and the RFP development. Beyond that, through the rest of it, we will definitely hold your hand. With the broadband and the state and the federal money, you don't have time to track that. We are, and we're engaging with those, and in fact, Sterling is such a close partner with Fortinet. We also are adding a grants office capability that we've got with grants office that we've just initiated this month, because a bunch of the funding that's going to be coming from the feds is going to be competitive. Typically, that left schools out. We don't think that should be the case, so we're jumping in there. And then cyber insurance and homework and all kinds of other issues. Next slide, please. All of these are causing you to have the security transformation. The average impact is 5.56. Data breach, and you're not guaranteed in getting all of your data back intact. They absolutely will make a copy, because every child, especially those without a credit record, are worth between $500 and $800 a record. And you do that times a school or times the district. And by the way, these are resold on the black market hundreds of times. It's billions of dollars. That's why you're a top target. So you can see the ransom attacks that have increased dramatically. And if you've never looked at the K12 cyber attack map, you should go look at that. That was one of the resource links we provided. And then And by the way, 60% of teachers and administrators haven't received any training or guidance in preventing cyber attacks. We're going to talk about that. Next slide, please. So the Federal Czar, I talked about them a couple minutes ago. This is their website, Shields Up. They are going to have a big impact on you, on your IT and your security of K12. And it's going to be a big part of the transformation. So no, if you haven't gone there yet, CISA.gov, CISA.gov, go there. There are some great pieces of information, some toolkits, but the specific K12, in fact, they had a recent release for K12 this week. The big one we're waiting on has not been released, but it is a great resource. And realize, yes, you're going to have the CISA as big brother looking over your security efforts. Next slide, please. One of the things that I would really recommend that you have somebody virtually attend is they are holding a K12 School Safety and Security Summit, November 1st through the 3rd. The information's right there, and just some of the things they're going to be covering there were about 15, I couldn't fit them all on the slide, are there. You need to be a part of this. It's free. Have somebody on there. I don't care if you record it or whatever you got to do. There's a strong feeling that that much awaited toolkit and the guidance will be included in this summit if it's not released before then. So please take advantage of this, because frankly, you're going to be held accountable for your security transformation. Your IT is going to be wearing another hat. And one of the things that they're going to talk about at the summit that we've seen repeatedly talked about is using some of your ESSER monies and other funding. If you don't have the staff to have a security person that's all that they do and respond to, within the next 12 months, you're going to need to, or use the funding for outsource. Now, the ESSER money that we're going to talk about can't be used to add personnel, which is unfortunate. It can be used to add services. So talking with Sterling, it might be a good idea to talk about managed security service and things like that. But just innovative ways to make sure you use the money and protect yourselves, because you are going to be held accountable. And there also is a law that has been approved by Congress. It's going to be approved by the president, where you're going to have mandated security breach reporting. Even in an attempt of a breach, you're going to have to report those to the CISA office. So that's going to take up time. And that's going to take up, because I'm sure you're getting probed every day. So just be aware of that. Next slide, please. The other thing that's coming down that's absolutely a part of CISA, the K12 Cybersecurity Law, which was in October 8th, this is where the CISA office is late. As you can see, they had 120 days to study the risks. They still haven't got it done. The 60 days to ensure the recommendations, still haven't got it done. But honestly, from what we're hearing inside the Beltway, part of the discussion was making sure there was funding available to do the transformations that we're discussing today. They're going to be developing that online training toolkit. We and other manufacturers of security have been a part of that. We've been actively engaged with the CISA office. It's been very interesting. They have some very bright people, but even though they have a big staff and big budget, they're still looking for new people. They tried to hit us up for some of ours, and we're not sharing. But we are giving insights. We work with them in the White House. But know that this cybersecurity law is going to have a direct impact on you. Next slide, please. So what they're recommending now, before that stuff comes out, create a cyber-informed culture. We've got a solution for that that we're going to talk about that's not going to cost you a dime, that we announced at the White House, with the White House that we'll talk about in a minute. Prioritize your endpoint security, because now you broaden the attack surface, because now you have complete mobile learning. A child can truly learn from anywhere they have connectivity. That means that attack surface has broadened exponentially. So providing endpoint protection, we have Forta EDR, for example, and MDR. Those are what they're recommending that you do now. Ensure network permissions are up to date, and you're also going to get impact from your insurance companies on this as well. They're not being done in a vacuum. The cyber insurance issues were being addressed along with what you're seeing with cybersecurity law. And the White House initiatives, they were all done hip to hip. Everybody was doing this together because it creates that pressure to create that transformation. And then update or develop an incident response plan. Not only a plan, but you're going to have the tools and things. You'll see that in the upcoming toolkit. So getting out ahead of that now will help you from playing from behind. Next slide, please. The White House put out an executive order earlier this year. All federal agencies have to have zero trust architecture by 2024. Zero trust, exactly what it means. You don't trust anybody inside the network or outside the network. You're going to have different levels of it, but it's going to include multi-factor authentication. It's your active and passive encryption and decryption, from phishing attacks for all staff devices. This is, by the way, this is going to be drifting down to state, local, and education in K-12 as well. So in fact, that's what that K-12 Cybersecurity Law is going to be pushing forward. So realize this is coming to you. And it's going to be coming quick in about the same time frame. Enterprise applications have to be secured, and if you're going to use cloud, which K-12 is one of the fastest adopters of cloud, you need to make sure that they have adequate and comprehensive security there, and automated detection and blocking of access to authorized information. If you're using 7 different devices to have security on your network, that's not going to cut it. So they have a whole initiative on the ZTNA. It's going to be mirrored in the K-12 Cyberbook, but zero trust is where we're all going. So definitely try to get out in front of it. And that's another reason why you need to use the available funding you have in ESSER to get this started. Next slide, please. So the other driving force, you've already had a 1-2 punch. Well, here's the haymaker. Cyber insurance has drastically increased their premiums. And in fact, we had school districts in South Carolina telling us they were being charged 300 to 400 times what they were the previous year. No longer were they just getting a survey that they filled out. They now were active. In fact, we've seen many schools, and we've been getting calls where they've come into the district and audited the district security practices. By the way, their insurance companies are ramping up their cybersecurity experts to be able to do just that. It's not just for education, state and local government, public sector, private sector. They're all facing this same issue, so much so that the Utah state of Utah is looking at doing self-insurance because of the big rise in cost, and also what they were being forced to do. Because what has happened is, you'll look at the major areas in insurance right now, and we're hearing this time and time again, is they want you to make sure you have the following in place. And if not, your insurance premiums go up more. If you do have it in place, it may keep you more in line. I think you're still going to have increases, but having multi-factor authentication, having passive and active encryption and decryption, policies and procedures in place, backup processes, user awareness and training. Now that is a big piece we're going to talk about in a minute. And then endpoint detection and response, again, EDR. Having these taken care of and in place are going to be crucial for you to keep your insurance premiums at a rate that you can hopefully afford. Not having these in place will absolutely increase your cost for insurance. And I don't think there's a single school district alive that can go without insurance. So that's a big pressure on you as well. Sterling and Fortinet, we provide MFA, encryption, EDR, and user awareness and training. So for 4 of the 6 components we'll provide with you, and Sterling, backup processes and servers and things, they can definitely help you with that. Next slide, please. So the White House announced in July the Cyber Workforce and Education Summit, which you would think, okay, that's a big deal. Well, it is a big deal because you're going to be required to have a security-aware staff. Well, next slide, please. From that, when we were there with the White House, we announced our K-12 training initiative. So what it is we have it's a fantastic program, and it's going to be free for all of the 8 million K12 employees across the US. You sign up by district, and you don't have to have Fortinet in your network. You don't have to have Fortinet as part of your solutions. What we have, and it's an award-winning program, and we've actually taken it, and we have a whole training team that have redone it to focus on K12 issues. So this is a self-paced online training course that costs you $0. There's no quid pro quo. It absolutely provides training. It provides certification. There's testing. Again, it's self-paced. You can go back. There's no negatives. If you fail and have to go back, you just go back and get the information you missed, and then you keep going forward. So it'll give you the certifications you need, which a lot of the teachers unions are requesting. And since some of your ESSER monies, if they want to, can be used for bonuses for employees or for incentives, having the training and then maybe using that for that, that's up to you. But we are providing that free. It is self-paced, it's video-based, highly interactive. That is going to be available October 1st. If a district wants to look at the early demo version, because we're just putting the wrapper on it now, you can absolutely screen that to see if you're enthused. If you want to know more about it, get a hold of Sterling, and we'll definitely bring that to you. Again, there's no quid pro quo, there's no purchase. This is strictly for all your employees. And honestly, get out in front of it now, because you're going to be required to have that training within the next 18 months. All these mandates that are coming through. So why not take advantage of it now? Again, we're going to launch this live October 1st, because with school, the first 30 days, 45 days are always rough. We heard you, so that's why we're launching it in October. Next slide, please. So the biggest hurdle, budget. Always funding. Next slide. Good news, you have funding sources. So you had ESSER 1, 2, and 3. You also had the Emergency Connect Fund. That fund is now closed. They are looking to potentially put a replacement in. It can't be called the ECF because there's not an emergency in place. I was on a call yesterday with a bunch of lobbyists. We have 38, I think, and not including the ones behind the belt, inside the Beltway. And that is definitely being pushed at the congressional level to keep that going. But you had ESSER 1, and you've got, if you have any balance left at your district, and by the way, the district holds the money, the district is the LEA, so that 90% of your allocations had to go to the local education agency. We had a couple states that tried to hold it at the state and said that they had already spent it. They got sued by their districts. And I won't tell you who they are, but they had to correct their errors. So that first funding came through. It was $13.29 billion. ESSER 2 came through for K12 with $54 billion for K12. ESSER 3, $128.6 billion. That has to be spent by 2024. ESSER 2 by 2023, the September 30th. So if your district has any of the first round monies not spent and committed, shake that tree, because you got to spend it by the end of this coming month. And absolutely, if it hasn't been spent, it should go to technology, in my opinion. Also, you've got the E-rate Category 2 budgets. You're in year 3 of the year 5. So make sure that you're aware of that. And as we talked about, use the monies together. Next slide, please. So ESSER 1 and 2, midway through the second year of the pandemic, only 39% used any on technology, 61% didn't. Next slide, please. You need to correct that error, because so many people didn't believe they could use it for technology security, and it's written through all three. And the US DOE released in some of their guidance this exact information. It's technology and the use of the funds called out 41 times. Wide use of network, remote learning, etc. Cybersecurity was specifically called out in Section A21. ESSER and GEAR funding can be used for it as well. GEAR is the governor's emergency relief, and hotspots were called out 4 times. Next slide, please. You absolutely can use the ESSER money for technology, and you should be. So you can see the numbers, 189.5 billion. This is the U.S. Department of Ed as they're tracking the money, has been put into K-12, not counting the 4.2 billion and the governor's emergency relief money, which can go to higher ed, private, or K-12. So you can see the amount of money compared to higher ed, where it was 75 billion. Next slide, please. That the money has been released. Give you some examples. Some of you may be on this call. El Dorado Union High School District. You've got 977,000 and change for E-rate. You more than likely have spent the first round, which was CARES. That's why it's in red. But I seriously question, because if you go, you look at the USDOE site, there's only one state that has spent more than 50% of their funds. So the CRRSA, which is the second bucket, I would definitely check and see where you're at and where the district is at. And then your ARP money, less than 5% of that is being spent nationwide. So even if you just look at the available funding, not counting CRRSA, which you should go after, and any leftover in CARES, but in ARP, the third bucket, and if you add E-rate, for sure, those are monies using that correctively and correctly. And that's why getting together with these early planning sessions with Sterling and Fortinet, planning this out, breaking out what you'll cover with E-rate, what won't be covered with E-rate, but really what these need to be is everything from the immediate need list to your wish and want list. And in these meetings, let's get those talked about till you're exhausted and you covered every ed tech need that you have, security need you have. And then Sterling we'll talk about the solutions, and then go get you the actual real quotes, because you want to be able to move this money. The reason why E-rate has its process, ESSER, any of these rounds, the money is at the local district. It's local district decisions, local district distribution. So it's your LEA that's in charge of it. So what we recommend is sitting down, having that plan like we talked about, and turning that into an effective business case, and identify which funding is going to be used for what, because when you can do that and have Uncle Sam pay for it, it's much easier for the district to go along with it. Also, kindergarten simple reason why for every item you have. And when we have these meetings, we'll start out and we'll get 1 to 3 things they need. But when we really just listen and explore, it ends up being the wish and want 12, 15, 20 items. Don't be afraid of that. This money, the ESSER money, if it doesn't get used, the feds are taking it back. And in the first round, higher education left $6 billion on the table and it was all taken back. Don't do that. Make sure that you're involved. And we've got a whole plan, Sterling and Fortinet, to be able to walk you through, where it's not about selling you widgets. It's about finding out what your needs are, how to fund them, what the solutions should be, what those costs are going to be, making sure we can upload as much of your OPEX, your annual cost, into Uncle Sam's money instead of your local budget. Because what we can do, if we do it correctly, we can cover this funding through 24-25 school year. That's a huge savings for you in your local budget. So you can see El Dorado in the third round, 4.2. Millard, I'm going to say Millard, 14.2. Merced, 31.1. These are millions. Canyon, 6. Benjamin, 349,000. They're a little school district in Texas. Now, private schools and charters, it depends on how the funding was. They may have gotten some GEAR funding or EAN funding, but that information's not been disclosed publicly. So for Antonian College Prep, you have 122,411 in E-rate. So that's why I put that out there. I just went with what was known. And then York, 1.7 in ARP. So you can see effectively, you can at least go after the ARP money, the third bucket, and E-rate. But I would suggest finding out what's in the first and second rounds remaining, and then building that plan around that. Next slide, please. I know I'm going over. I'm hurrying. So there's 15 areas of latitude, PPE, buses, and the whole 9 yards. Everything in your network, every device that you need for the students, for the teachers, anything that is required to keep the recovery and the success of education going is eligible. This is what we provide, and we actually have 60 plus solutions that are all eligible. It's not like E-rate where it's a very finite piece. Everything from our Linksys homework, which provides hotspots to students across the U.S. and everything in between. All of that is available and eligible to be used with ESSER. And remember, the ESSER funding doesn't require a local dollar match. The state can't implement one. It's 100% federal fund, 100% federal spend. No local dollar impact. Next slide, please. So a perfect example of what we've seen an explosion of because of the pressing factors that we talked about earlier. Florida MDR, our endpoint protection. This is a perfect example of that. You'll be able to read that with the slides. I'm not going to do a commercial right now. Next slide, please. Also, homework for business, homework for education. We've seen a massive explosion in remote working, especially state and local government, but also in education. There's still a lot of schools that are having virtual instructors because rather than lose a student because they're moving, and we see it a lot out here in California with the migrant issue, keeping those modems and hotspots together allows that student, because all 50 states have allowed for remote education to be counted towards your ADA, it allows you to retain that student and also the funding for that student with your average daily attendance. These have been instrumental in doing that. Next slide. And we're wrapping it up here. So next step, really get with Sterling and us. Let's get that team. Let's assess your needs, build a tech plan around it. There's a lot of words here, but basically is what we talked about. Identify your needs from your immediate to your wish and want list. Look multiple years down the road. And then once we get that and we get the costs of each item, what's going to be the positive impact with the project? More importantly, we want this to be kindergarten simple. And then with what's going to be the negative impact if you don't, the more draconian and painful and practical that it is, the quicker administration will understand the need. And again, if you're able to use federal funding, they're going to have to use it somewhere. Technology needs to have their hand out and at the front of the line. So let's see. Try out solutions. Discuss utilizing ESSER here in E-rate. Like we talked about, and schedule a team meeting with the district leadership. We'll go with you, Sterling. We'll go with you. We're not going to just help you plan this and then throw you into the lion's den. We will hold your hand. We'll go do this together. We've been on virtual and in-person board meetings to go through this and with administration, so we'll definitely be there for you. Next slide, please. That's it. You finally get to hear me stop babbling. Any questions?
Jeff, here we have one here is what network and technology equipment qualify for ESSER? I know you touched on that briefly towards the end there.
So everything that's in your network, including cabling actually, but all the components in the network and the securing of that are eligible because it all maps out to student success and recovery because you can't do it without the network. So that's a very simple answer to that.
Great, thank you. We just had another one coming through the chat asking, are there matching funds required with ESSER? And I think you answered that one too.
Well, people get confused. So because we've heard ESSER, ECF, and E-rate, a lot of E's. Mm-hmm. So ESSER does not require matching funds. E-rate does, but you can use ESSER to pay for it. What you can't do is if you apply for ECF and they're delayed in getting you the money because USAC is way behind in getting that out, you can't use ESSER with ECF. You can with E-rate. And think of it this way. ESSER can be used to help E-rate, which is the internal network. ECF is external. It is for home devices. So ESSER and ECF can't mix their monies. ESSER and E-rate can. It's a stupid rule the FCC put in. They allowed it with E-rate, but not with ECF. And everybody is just realizing now that USAC is so slow with it that it was a mistake not allowing them to use ESSER with ECF, but you can with E-rate. And there is no match, only with E-rate.
Great. Thanks for providing that clarity there. Other questions from the group? Go ahead and throw those in the chat if you have them. Well, Jeff, any last word here from you before we start to wrap up?
One thing that I always push is IT teams, ed tech teams, you now have to become an advocate. You have to go get the money because it can be used virtually in every department. You've got to develop the plan. That's why getting with Sterling and we put together the plan, both short-term and long-term, and then putting that as a business plan moving forward and presenting that case, it absolutely can get you the funding. If you just go say, hey, I need some money, stand in line. So you've got to become an advocate. You've got to go pursue the funding. Don't wait for it, is my final chat. And you can do that with Sterling and Fortinet.
Great. I think that's really, really good advice there. We do have one more question in the chat here. CIRSA is ESR2 and ARP is ESR3. Is that correct?
Yes, and CARES.
Joey just wants to confirm that.
Yep.
Okay. I'm going to echo what Jeff was just saying. The time is now to be pursuing this. Be proactive in this process, whatever line of funding you decide to pursue. And as Jeff was talking about, you have teammates, so to speak, in Sterling and Fortinet. We're here to support you. We have resources and experts on staff that are, ready to go, ready to help you with the meetings, planning the RFP process, whatever that happens to be. We are here. We want to make it as easy as possible for all of you. We will be sending out a recording of this, so you'll have that for your reference later on. Thank you all again for attending and, listening to us. We really do appreciate that. Jeff, thanks for an incredible presentation. I know I, for one, learned a lot. Have a great rest of your day, all. Thanks again.